Welcome to Changing Places video number 7. This is going to be about recognising different parts of rural and urban areas, because at A level just talking about rural and urban isn't always detailed enough, because within an urban area there are different sections, within the countryside there are variations. So this video is going to be helping you to understand how we divide them up really, and kind of what clues you would have about how to tell the difference between one and the other. So this is the model that we use to divide rural areas up. It's really old now, it's from 1979, but it still has some relevance. So, do you need to learn it? Not particularly. It's just the idea, I suppose, that it would be good to get in your head. And the idea is that this, to be honest, could be a town or a city. So the grey blob is a town or a city. Please don't get bogged down in worrying about what a conurbation is. I will tell you so that you're clear, but you don't need to remember. A conurbation is where two or more urban areas have joined together. So if we kept building houses and things to the extent that Taunton and Wellington became one, it would be a conurbation. One of the best known examples in the UK, you could either use London or Birmingham, both of which are cities that have grown so big they've swallowed up smaller towns within them. Okay, so you've got a town and a city. These rings are all about distance. Well, time actually, time and distance. And that, folks, is how we divide up rural areas, by how long it takes to get there, okay? So a green belt, again, is nothing for you. It's not really on the syllabus, but most towns and cities have a strip of land where the local council have said, you mustn't build here. We want to keep this as a green strip of land. It's called green because it's mainly covered in trees and plants, and it's called a belt because it goes all the way around the outside of the town or city. So don't worry about that one. This is where it starts to get interesting. Villages that are less than half an hour's journey tend to be growing in the UK. They have become popular places to live and commute to work in the nearest town or city. So in fact, these villages are not having any problems at all with depopulation, spiral of decline, any of that stuff. In fact, they have the opposite situation where they are growing, and that might cause issues in terms of a little bit of conflict with local people, more traffic, more noise, but yeah, they're growing. And sometimes they are known as suburbanised villages, which means if you looked at them, you could be forgiven for thinking that they were part of an urban area. They've got the same kind of modern houses, the same kind of road layouts, all of that stuff. And by the end of this video, you'll be much clearer on what suburbs look like, so that will make more sense. Okay, so less than half an hour. Actually, the countryside, generally, people are moving in, population's growing, all that stuff. We start to see the depopulation and the spiral of decline stuff once you get more than an hour away, and it just gets worse as you get more remote. So once you get to an hour or more, actually the vast majority of people probably wouldn't commute that distance every day. They would do half an hour, but they probably wouldn't do an hour. And therefore, you start to see places possibly losing people. This one is probably doing all right because it's along a main road. Whereas this one is down a little lane, and actually that's hassle. When and I know I say this a lot, but it's just to kind of help you visualise it. The place where I lived when I was growing up, this is genuinely true, the road to my house had grass down the middle of it, and that wasn't a driveway, that was the road, and it had grass growing down the middle because hardly anyone ever drove down that road. And most people cannot be bothered with driving down those kinds of roads for long distances to get to work. So it's all about how accessible rural areas are. If they're pretty accessible, they tend to be growing, and the harder they are to reach and the more effort you have to go to get there, you will find people leaving, depopulation, spiral of decline, and all that kind of stuff. So there's no kind of particular words for you to remember from this one, it's just the general idea. Okay? So, urban areas, however, are slightly different in that the sections that I'm about to talk to you about are very recognisable and there are things to learn. Right, now you can actually see different urban sections within this image, and what I'm hoping is that by the end of this video you will actually be able to go, oh yeah, that's that bit and that's that bit. That's the aim. We'll see how we get on. Okay. Learn the words, don't learn the model. This might be something that you learned at GCSE. Don't learn it for A-level. It's very out of fashion. Yeah, they don't like it. Okay, so learn the words, but not the actual model. Okay, so we're going to learn what the Central Business District looks like. And yes, you can absolutely call it by its acronym CBD. You don't have to write it out in full. CBD, inner city, inner suburbs, outer suburbs. If you're quite a visual learner and you need some kind of a diagram, I would substitute this one instead. I think this one is brilliant because it goes through the same 4 sections, but it's also kind of like a graph in that this bit is correlated with this arrow. As you go closer to the centre of a town or city, the land gets more expensive, and that, ladies and gents, explains a lot of what we're going to talk about. Okay, so substitute that for that, and then I think it is worth learning, and I actually think it's pretty helpful. So the red is your CBD, the orange is your inner city, the darker yellow is your inner suburbs, and this is your outer suburbs. Okay, so how would you recognise them? Well, first of all, the CBD, there's a giveaway clue, ladies and gents, if you're looking at a map. It's in the centre. That's why it's called the CBD. It's also where the businesses are, so if you look for kind of shops and offices, so it's pretty easy to find the CBD. It's in the middle, it's where the businesses are. Also though, and here is of course the famous Gherkin in London, you will have the tallest buildings because, here look, the land is the most expensive. So if you've been able to afford to buy a piece of land that's cost you loads of money, the sensible thing to do is make your building tall, because then you are going to get the maximum benefit for your piece of land. So the CBD will tend to have the tallest buildings. Now, if you come down to the southwest, they're not quite so impressive, but you should still find the tallest buildings in the CBD. This is Taunton and this is Exeter. Okay, the inner city, right, it's pretty easy to spot once you know how. The inner city is very, very high density. Everything is squashed in, all right? And that's because, sorry to keep going back, but I think it's important. The land here is still quite expensive. So you can't afford to give people too much space. The land is just too valuable. So it's high density, everything is squashed in. The other thing is, going back to Changing Places video number 3, the inner city areas of the UK were built in the Industrial Revolution. That is when we built our factories. So you will find old factory buildings in the inner city. They probably now are flats or offices or something else, but you may well find some old factory buildings. These are the houses that were built for the workers who moved in to the areas to get the jobs. They are Victorian because that's when the Industrial Revolution happened. They are tiny because the land is very expensive, so you don't have a front garden. And you might be thinking, why have they not got parking? Well, sorry to state the obvious, it's the Victorian times. Most people didn't own a car, so that's why there's on-road parking in inner city areas, because there was logically nothing else, to do. You may find that sometimes the factory buildings have been demolished because, of course, we've now had deindustrialisation in the UK, and they've possibly been replaced by blocks of flats like this. Again, they're tall because we're still talking quite expensive land, and therefore you build upwards. So inner city is residential. It's mostly old Victorian terraced houses. Terraced means they're all joined together in a row, possibly some old factories, possibly some blocks of flats. Okay, inner suburbs. Suburbs is kind of the edge, but we have two sections. So the inner ones, fairly logically, are inside and the outer ones are outside. The inner suburbs are, in the UK, they are 1930s semi-detached houses. That's your kind of giveaway clue. Semi-detached means joined to one house on one side but not joined on the other. That's semi-detached. We can see front gardens, garages, driveways, because it's the last time I do this, I promise. Look, we've come to here. The land is much cheaper. We don't have to build quite such high density. We can have gardens, we can have some open space and parks and things like that. So they're your inner suburbs. And then finally, we come to the most modern housing. These are generally built from the 1950s onwards, so there's a huge mixture of building styles. This is 1980s, this is modern day, but what you're looking for is bigger houses with gardens, probably detached, so the houses are not joined, although that's not always the case. Low density, lots of play parks and that kind of stuff. And a giveaway clue is your cul-de-sac, your dead-end road. The people who tend to live in the modern suburbs tend to be families with kids, and therefore one of the things you really want in an area with lots of families is safe traffic, and one surefire way to slow cars down is to put a dead-end road in, and I'll show you on a map in a minute that they are really easy to spot. Okay, that's the last bit. Where the urban meets the rural is called your rural-urban fringe, which is, let's be honest, quite easy to find. So this would be the beginning of the countryside, this is the end of your urban, and they're kind of, mixing in together a little bit, and that's the name it has. Okay, so what I'm going to do for the last part of today is show you a map, just to give you a sense of how you might recognise these on a map. I'm going to use Bristol because, I don't know, I'm using Bristol. This is the CBD. Well, how do I know that? Well, on an OS map, these browny beigey colours are buildings. And in the CBD, you expect lots of big blocks of brown, because usually shops are kind of all joined together in big blocks, aren't they? So we've got some big blocks here. Other things that might be potentially helpful, if the cathedral is there, that might be a clue that you're quite near the centre. The train station, often train stations are quite near the CBD, but always look for your big blocks of brown. That's a good clue that you're in the CBD. This is classic inner city, absolutely classic. It's all very high density, there's not a huge amount of open space. These long lines of brown are what terraced houses look like, where they're all joined together, and then each of these white rectangles is their backyard. No front garden, no driveway, no parking, just no room, and obviously it's the Victorian times, we didn't need driveways and garages. So that is classic inner city. And then if we come out, so let's come here. So we're moving towards the edge. Look, now we've got much lower density, lots more open space here. We can also see some semi-detached and detached houses with massive gardens. Look at them. There's a nice little dead-end road. There's a nice little cul-de-sac there, just to prove that I don't make these things up. And you can see a real difference between there and there. Look, all the terraced housing and high density there. So there is a kind of nice, easy thing to spot. And then that would be your rural urban fringe. So we see the end of the urban and the beginning of the rural. All right, so it's just about recognising the differences and being a little bit more specific than just necessarily saying urban and rural. Okay, thanks everyone.